Well, good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to see y'all on this Sunday morning, and I'm really appreciative of Ryan for asking me to be here to do this foundation meeting. My name is Stephen Root, and I am a recovered alcoholic. My sobriety date is January 7th, 2008, and it's really a privilege to see some of the faces on this screen. One of whom is near and dear to my heart. Myers was my grant sponsor, and I'm just tickled to death to see him on here. But at the same time, my gut is a little wrenched in nerves to sit and see him listening to this talk. So I'll do the best I can. But it's just a real honor to have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body from the precise, clear-cut instructions outlined in our basic text. And I was one of these guys who was very fortunate to arrive to a treatment center where a man who had shown up to carry the message directly out of the big book, and that message in turn turned out to be exactly what I needed to do to recover from alcoholism, and I'm forever grateful. So what I thought I'd do is I try to do my best foundation meeting. My home group here in Austin, Texas, is the Primary Purpose Group. We meet Tuesday nights at 7:30. And in fact, I'm looking forward to seeing you guys there as you start to venture towards Austin. We encourage you to come check us out. We've been going for 18 years now, going strong. And gosh, we just have a lot of fun studying that message line by line out of the book. We're in a really exciting part of the book. Actually, we're in the doctor's opinion. So in fact, we'll be referencing the doctor's opinion today quite a bit. So one of the things that I know is that my early experience in AA informed my later experience. And my early experience was, when I first arrived in AA when I was 22 years old, I was pulled in with a vision. Some guys in a treatment center came properly armed with the facts about themselves, and they had big books in tow. And they said, listen, buddy, if you want to really recover from this illness, you're going to need to get serious about studying this book. You're going to need to get serious about taking the steps out of this book. And what we're really trying to do is produce a revolutionary spiritual experience as a result of these clear-cut directions out of this book. And I did recover from a hopeless state of mind and body at the age of 22, but I've had the experience of walking away from the work. Some of the gifts of sobriety kind of pulled me away. And so when I'm in a foundation meeting, I always think about, who's my audience? Like, who am I speaking with? When I conduct a foundation meeting here in Austin, I usually ask for a show of hands. Are we talking to people that are just coming in for the first time, never been to an AA meeting? Are we talking to people who have been in and out for years? Are we talking to, some guy dying of untreated alcoholism and he's kind of looking to have a reconnection with the work? I think that's important. Another thing that I think is really important is what we're really trying to do in Primary Purpose is back up everything we say out of the basic text. Because if you're in an average open discussion meeting anywhere in this country, and Lord knows I've been to meetings in and around the country, what you're hearing in a meeting is not always going to line up with what Alcoholics Anonymous is about. You're not always going to be hearing the clear-cut message of recovery at a normal average open discussion meeting. So what we're trying to do in Primary Purpose is really get some clarity of message, trying to carry a message of depth and weight. And another thing I think is important is that we're really talking about the singleness of purpose. Alcoholics Anonymous as a worldwide fellowship, we do one thing and one thing really well. We carry the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. And so identification is really key here. It's not that we're trying to keep the dirty dope fiends out of our AA meetings. If you have a problem other than alcohol, we're trying to get you linked up with the right fellowship. In fact, we're trying to talk to you after the meeting and get you linked up to whatever fellowship you might more identify with. And so as a kind of as a rule here in Austin, we have what's called an open meeting, which an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, we welcome anyone who's curious about alcoholism and wants to learn a little more about alcoholism. But in a closed meeting, I always tell these new guys, when you're in a closed meeting, it's for alcoholics only. People who are identifying with the disease of alcoholism, they're sharing about recovery from alcoholism. So it's kind of a key distinction, really, that I try and make. We're also going to talk a little bit about anonymity. What is it? It's one of the principles of anonymity really is trying to keep our giant alcoholic egos in check. We're making a key distinction in membership. It's all members are equal, right? Anonymity is going to try and keep us all at the same level. There's no special member of AA. There's no one with a special, brand behind their name. Anonymity really is trying to make sure that the AA message is what's the focus, not the messenger. and we're trying to convince a newcomer you don't have anything to be ashamed of. You come to an AA meeting looking for recovery from alcoholism. No one here is going to out you at your job or at your social circle. Your identification is kept secret. So, all right. Speaking of identification, my experience was when I sat down knee to knee with my sponsor, what I found out later was that he was actually qualifying me. He was qualifying me as whether or not I had alcoholism. Not everyone who shows up in an AA meeting is an alcoholic. That would be a huge mistake on our part. There's someone in Travis County Jail tonight here in Austin, Texas, who got arrested for a DUI last night. We had a huge UT game, or we have one coming up. We got an ACL music festival. I know for a fact someone got arrested last night, sitting in jail with a DUI right now. Does not make them alcoholic. What we're really talking about to qualify a new man is whether or not they have the two key features of alcoholism, whether or not they can identify with the physical allergy and the mental obsession. And we're not to brand anyone an alcoholic. When you look back in the chapter, Working with Others, we got a lot of really crucial information to help us 12-step or qualify a new man. And one of the things that I've always held on to, because my sponsor, Charlie Parker, didn't sit me down and tell me I was an alcoholic. In fact, he didn't sit me down and tell me I had a problem. What he did was he laid out the hopeless condition in mind and body and asked me to lay that up against my own drinking experience. And when he was done with that, he asked me if I still felt like I had a solution to that hopeless condition of mind and body, right? So we kind of did this spiritual exercise. My grand sponsor, Mark Houston, was big. He said a spiritual exercise must begin with a question, right? Am I an alcoholic? Am I not an alcoholic? Do I drink like the man who's trying to carry the message to me? Do I drink like the men in this book? Does my experience with alcohol line up with the experience in the big book? So one of the things we like to go into really is that sometimes I hear people say, well, Stephen, you worked the first step before you got to AA. Well, that wasn't Jim's story. That wasn't Fred's story. And that wasn't Dr. Bob's story, one of the co-founders of our fellowship. Their experience was they didn't know what it meant to be alcoholic either. In fact, if you look at the 12-step call that Bill did with Dr. Bob, you'll see that Dr. Bob was kind of like a drunken priest. His understanding of things spiritual was far greater than Bill. And when Bill was writing in AA Comes of Age, they asked Dr. Bob to contribute to that. And Dr. Bob said, well, it wasn't Bill's religious or spiritual teaching that really pulled him in. It was Bill's description of his drinking, right? The twin ogres of madness and death, the physical allergy and the mental obsession, really, that drew Dr. Bob in with a vision of hopelessness. And that vision truly made Dr. Bob pursue the spiritual program with the willingness he'd never been able to muster before. So kind of the foundation of step one, or the foundation of the foundation meeting, in my opinion, is hopelessness, right? I'm trying to convince the newcomer that he doesn't have an answer for the problem of alcoholism. I'm trying to give him a hopeless condition of mind and body. So when I'm looking at that, I'm going, page 18 gives a pretty good description of what I'm supposed to be, right? What I'm supposed to be as a sponsor, what I'm supposed to be as a recovered member of this fellowship. And it kind of gives me some qualifications. One of the qualifications that's really key here, because identification is so critical, is that have I had the same difficulty with alcoholism? Not the exact thing. It's not that we all drink in the exact way. In fact, one of the distinctions I like to make is my alcoholism has nothing to do with the consequences that I've received because of my drinking. My alcoholism is not conditional, right? It doesn't have anything to do with my upbringing or with trauma. My alcoholism is not, have anything to do with whether or not I've been arrested or whether or not I've been homeless. Those things do not make me alcoholic. In fact, there are many members in our group who have recovered from alcoholism who none of those things have happened. So again, the real clear distinction is I'm supposed to share in a general way what it was like, what happened, what it's like now, right? So I've had to have the same difficulty with alcohol, and I've had to found this solution, the solution outlined in the book. And I need to be properly armed with the facts about myself. So I need to be coming out of my own experience, right? It's one thing to come out of Myers' experience or Barry's experience or Ryan's experience, but what is my experience with alcohol? That's really key here. So on page 18, it says, until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. So one alcoholic to another alcoholic talking about alcoholism and problems as they relate to alcohol. Now, when I do that, we're really going to talk a lot about the basic text. It's kind of the you hear a lot about what is the basic text in a meeting, and for us, this is exactly on page 19. I think it kind of gives a pretty great definition. There's definitions all throughout the book, but page 19 does a pretty good job. On page 19, it says this volume is going to set forth the problem as we see it. It's going to combine experience and knowledge, and it contains a useful program for anyone concerned with the drinking problem. So that's kind of the text in a nutshell. Later on, it's going to talk about precise instructions. It's going to talk about clear-cut directions. But for right now, early on in the book, we're going to use that definition. So as it turns out, I have really two problems with alcohol. One problem with alcohol I have is when I drink it. The other problem with alcohol I have is when I don't drink it. But other than that, I have a pretty good handle on this whole alcohol thing, right? So let's talk about the first problem that I have with alcohol. On page 20, we're going to turn statements into questions. One of the things we do in primary purpose group here in Austin is we're reading out of the book, we're turning statements into questions. On page 20, it says, am I curious to discover how and why in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, I can recover from a hopeless condition of mind and body? And that's a pretty fair question to someone coming into a foundation meeting. Is how did we recover from a seemingly hopeless condition of mind and body? What did we do? What did we do? It's a cool question to have in the mind of a newcomer. So what we really want to do is talk about the first problem. The first problem with alcohol laid out so beautifully in the doctor's opinion. It's the physical allergy, the first piece of identification that must take place. And Dr. Silkworth does an amazing job. Dr. Silkworth, no less than a medical saint, treated about 40,000 of us. And at the time, Bill Wilson had come under his care several times. And as a result of working with so many of us and being heartbroken at the fact that we would, come in seeking treatment and get physically sober and leave and then return just in a shambles, in a wreck. Over time, Dr. Silkworth developed this theory that we have an allergic reaction to alcohol. And he talks about it in the doctor's opinion, XXV, III. Said we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, the action of alcohol. And that's a key distinction here. We're talking about what happens when I put alcohol in my body, the action of alcohol, what happens when I take a drink. On these chronic alcoholics, there's another key distinction. I looked this word up, chronic. It means a lifelong condition. Is a manifestation of an allergy. So what happens when I take a drink? It's a manifestation of an allergy. And the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. So some of these words, this wasn't the language I was using out there on the streets when I came into AA. This was the language of Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know what these words meant. I had to look them up. Manifestation simply means how something shows up. Allergy is an abnormal physical reaction. And a phenomenon is something that happens that's totally unknown, not completely understood. But the word never really jumped out to me. And so if this never occurs in the average temperate drinker, that means that I've been drinking with a lot of people who I thought might have drank just like me. But there's no way of pouring enough alcohol down these people's throats to make them experience this phenomenon of craving. If they're not experiencing, the word never, it's a pretty black and white definition, never occurs in the average temperate drinker. So that means that this is occurring in me, that I'm in real trouble here. So the question I ask myself, or one of the questions I ask people is, have I ever suffered alcoholic torture? Is my body as abnormal as my mind? I love what Bill wrote on XXVI. He said, it didn't satisfy us to be told that we can't control our drinking because we're maladjusted to life, or we're in full flight from reality, or we're outright mental defectives. In fact, I've seen a lot of people who I drank with who seem to fall in those categories. But in fact, alcohol, their relationship with alcohol was not the same relationship as I had. I saw these people, if times got hard, or if they, had a real reason to quit, they could set down alcohol and be done. But if you're a real alcoholic, you're not able to do that because of this physical reaction to alcohol. Is that, I set out to drink just one. And as soon as I put alcohol in my body, I'm drinking 15 or 30. I have an abnormal physical reaction as soon as alcohol gets in my body that I can't control. No matter how powerful my desire to control my drinking, once I start, I can't control how much I drink, no matter how much I do, no matter how much I would want to, right? So Silkworth goes on to describe this. He says, these allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. Once having formed the habit and found they can't break it, lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up in them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. So after a while, it seems pretty normal to have 2 drinks and end up shutting the bar down, or to have 2 drinks and end up waking up and not remember where I was, right? So my alcoholic life at a certain time starts to become normal. And so the progressive nature of the illness is really a key factor here. It's like when I first started drinking, I didn't have many consequences. But as my drinking progressed, I started having more serious consequences. And again, I said before, consequences aren't what make me an alcoholic. My inability to control alcohol once I put it in my system is one of the key factors here that makes me alcoholic. But, you know, over time, I started to realize I'm drinking with people who seem to be like me. But when they start drinking, it's like they're not crashing the car. They're not getting arrested. You know, they're not losing their family or their position at work. So some of the things that happen as a result of me experiencing this craving are pretty severe. One thing that I want to make a distinction here, and I think it's a common mistake, is some people think alcoholism has something to do with age, gender, race, intelligence, but none of those things are a factor here, right? If the craving develops in me and never goes away, it's never permanently eradicated, that's really what we're focusing here. Alcohol is no, is not, just not as distinguish itself based on where I come from or what I've lived through, right? So now that's a major problem if I'm an alcoholic. What happens to me when I drink? Because if it's never permanently eradicated, that means that I can't just be physically sober. That can't be the solution to my alcoholism. So just sobering me up and sending me to an AA meeting, and you know, if that were the solution to alcoholism, the book would be 1 page long. It would just say, Stephen, you know what? Don't drink no matter what, and you know, never drink another drink again, and you'll be fine. So if it was just being physically sober, you know, then we would all have gone to a detox and gotten out and been perfectly fine. But that's not the main problem, right? That's a big problem. It's not my main problem. So what starts to take place for me when I'm sober, that's what we're really talking about, the second condition of alcoholism. What happens to me when I don't have alcohol in my system? So the main problem, physical allergy presents as the phenomenon of craving. It's a big problem, but it's not my biggest problem. On XXVIII, this is what happens when I'm sober. Dr. Silkworth does a really great job here talking about my sober condition. He says, I'm restless, I'm irritable, and I'm discontent when I'm not drinking. So restless, what does that mean? It means that I'm never really rested. I'm always on the move. I'm like a caged animal. I've always got to be moving. I get somewhere, I don't feel like I should be there. I got to go somewhere else. Irritable, right? Everybody's getting on my nerves. It's like existence starts to become fingernails on a chalk. I got this internal spring that's winding up, and I never feel like anyone's doing things right. I got a really keen ability to notice how everyone's doing stuff wrong. So discontent, what does this mean? It means I'm going to line everything up sober. I'm going to think I'm going to get the job back. I'm going to get the relationship back. I'm going to get everything up. I'm going to set all that in front of me, not taking another drink. And then I'm going to push all that aside in favor of taking that next first drink. It's like I've got an internal spiritual maladjusted condition. Now, on page 52 of the big book, it talks about this. It talks about the bedevilments. And I think a lot of us now refer to this passage as untreated alcoholism. So see if this lines up with your experience when you're sober. It's like I've set the drink down. I've come to an AA meeting. I've decided I'm going to put the plug in the jug. I've decided I'm never going to drink again. I've got all the reasons to stay sober. And I'm sitting in these meetings and I'm slowly going crazy. This internal spring's winding up, and I'm starting to have trouble with my personal relationships. I can't control my emotional nature, right? I'm a prey to misery and depression. I can't make a living, full of fear, unhappy. All these things start to present as my unmanageability in a nutshell. Because I can't manage the decision as to whether or not I drink again. What's going to happen slowly over a period of time, if I'm sitting in an AA meeting, just not drinking one day at a time and attending AA meetings, I'm not doing anything to treat this spiritual condition, is that I'm going to drink again. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When is it going to happen, right? So one of the things that I think a distinction is important to talk about is this vicious cycle that Dr. Sokor talks about. So, what happens to me when I get physically sober and I step to an AA meeting and I think just attending meetings is going to treat my alcoholism? Well, I make a firm decision, right? I've decided I've had enough. I'm really going to give this thing a shot. And I've got a firm resolution. I make this decision. I'm never going to drink again. This has to stop. And so I go to a few AA meetings. I'm physically sober and I'm not doing anything to treat this internal spiritual condition. I'm just sitting in these meetings. Now, what happens is slowly over a period of time, I start to begin to experience the bedevilments, the spiritual maladjustment, and it starts to wind up. And it's like, I'm going to make a meeting right up until I get there. And then I'm just going to sit there and kind of white knuckle it until I leave the meeting. And then I'm going to go to bed and God, I can't stand this. And I'm going to, I'm winding up, and slowly over a period of time, what's starting to take place is that my mind is starting to twist me back to the effect that alcohol produces. See, I know what's going to fix this internal spiritual condition. I know my mind is telling me, man, you can just have one. You could just have a drink. You could just maybe, and my neighbor, I see him over here and he's having a drink and he's not burning his life to the ground. He's not losing his job. His wife's not leaving him. And I start to think, man, this ain't fair. And slowly over a period of time, my mind begins to twist me back to the insanity of the first drink. So I get restless, irritable, and discontent right up until I pick up a drink. I pick up that drink. I set up the phenomenon of craving. I can't control how much I drink once I start. So I drink until I have to stop, right? Something happens. It forces me to quit. I've got to stop. And I get restless, irritable, and discontent again. And then I got to pick up and then I got to start until I have to stop, until I have to start. And this is the vicious cycle. And I do this over and over again. So loss of power, loss of control, and eventually we're going to talk about loss of choice. So if I'm a real alcoholic and I'm walking out of my second treatment center, looking good, sounding good, physically sober, separated from alcohol, why is it that 2 weeks later, I'm all lit up again? So the problem's not what happens to me when I take a drink. The problem's really not alcohol at all. In fact, what I start to see evidence in the book is that I'm drinking to treat a spiritual malady. I'm drinking spirits to treat a spiritual condition. And then we're going to start talking about this concept. I have a disease that no human power can treat. Now, later on in the book, it says at a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, we reach a stage where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is absolutely no avail. Now, Bill talks about it in his story, when alcohol ceased to be a luxury and it was a necessity, right? So one of the things I'm going to really start focusing on is whether or not I have the willpower when I'm sober to not pick up a drink again. Now, if I'm a real alcoholic, I'm going to be able to have to use that willpower 100 out of 100 times, right? I'm not going to be able to use my willpower 10 out of 20 times or 99 out of 100 times. And if I'm a real alcoholic, I don't have the willpower to not pick up a drink 100 out of 100 times. There's something internally goes on that's maladjusted. Well, one of the things that I like to talk about is that I can't think my way through a drink. Some of the things we hear in these AA meetings that don't line up with the book. I can't think my way through a drink. Something in my mind is broken. Something in my mind is obsessed about alcohol and the effect it produces. So I can't think my way through a drink. Now, another thing that I hear in a lot of AA meetings is that you just need to attend meetings. Just go to meetings, go to a lot of meetings. Don't drink in between meetings. Don't drink no matter what. Well, as I've come to find out, the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is not intended to treat my alcoholism. So just simply attending meetings, not drinking one day at a time, if I'm a real alcoholic, is not going to treat my alcoholism. It's not going to treat this internal spiritual condition, this maladjustment. So I've got this truth that I need to figure out if it's true for me. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, right? I've had the experience of being sober for many years, 9 years, in fact, and not doing anything that AA really asked me to do. I was a guy that was in the habit of attending a lot of meetings, just not drinking one day at a time. And slowly this internal condition was starting to just get sick. I was starting to get sicker and sicker. And my mind was screaming in horrifying psychic pain for some relief. And the fellowship wasn't treating it. My job wasn't treating it. My girlfriend wasn't treating it. In fact, all those things were starting to really irritate me. And so when I went to make my move and go back to another meeting, I found that I didn't have a move to make, right? I did not have the power to stop myself from picking up a drink after 9 years of sobriety. I had placed myself in a position long before where I was beyond human aid. So the failure of self-will and the failure of the fellowship to keep me sober. So early on, kind of to take us back, we got several tests as to whether or not you want to figure out if you're one of us. One of the tests we're going to recommend, and I don't recommend it oftentimes anymore, but what they used to recommend back in the 30s was go out and try some controlled drinking. So if you don't really think you're an alcoholic, go to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. Go try to have two. So because of the phenomenon of craving that occurs in an alcoholic, I'm not going to be able to go and just have two. I might go and just try to have two, and you know what? I decide it's a bad test day. I run into Myers, or I see Barry at the bar, and it's like, oh man, I gotta have a drink with Barry. I gotta buy a drink for my buddy Myers, right? Today's a really bad test day. Why don't we try this test again tomorrow, right? It's never today. It's always about tomorrow. Another thing the book recommends if you're trying to figure out if you're an alcoholic is try to stay sober for a year. Try to stop drinking for a year. The book says if you're a real alcoholic, you're probably not even going to make it a week. Some will be drunk the day within making that decision, right? Now, the third test, and the test that we're recommending, is why don't you sit down and read this book with another alcoholic? If you're sitting in this meeting and you're really curious as to whether or not you're an alcoholic, why don't you sit down with a member of Alcoholics Anonymous who's recovered from this illness and try and read this book and line it up against your own drinking experience and find out if you're one of us, right? Read this book with someone who's gone through the work in this book. And see, so another thing you might hear in some meetings is just don't drink no matter what. Now, that's a message to my body. That's not going to work. And another thing that I like to talk about is sometimes we talk to a lot of people who are really smart. You know, and like Roland Hazard was a guy kind of early on, and the spiritual experience was kind of given to him by Carl Jung. He was given this bit of information from Carl Jung. What would he need to recover? But Roland Hazard, under the care of one of the most brilliant psychotherapists of our time, thought if he just figured out how to recover from alcoholism, figured out the inner workings of his mind, that he would have been able to recover. Well, that didn't work, right? So it's not about being smart enough to think your way out of taking the next drink. So can I quit upon a non-spiritual basis, right? Well, when you look at Jim's story, one of the things that Jim talks about in his story is he talks about all went well for a time, right? So he sets the drinking down. He's looking good. He's feeling good. He's got the family back together, but he fails to perfect his spiritual life. So even Jim, who sits down with other members of Alcoholics Anonymous, he knows a little bit about alcoholism. He can't not pick up the next drink based on an unfit spiritual condition. So there's something more driving this desire to drink. It's something under the surface. So we start to kind of take out everything but the spiritual experience, right? So if you can't quit drinking because of the consequences, if you can't stop yourself from starting again because of the mental obsession, and if just attending meetings and deciding you've had enough and being humiliated enough is not going to stop you from picking up a drink, what is it that's going to cure our alcoholism? What's going to stop us from picking up the next drink? Well, this vital spiritual experience, right? We're going to need to talk about God. We're going to need to talk about your belief in God. We're going to talk about the spiritual experience. So Carl Jung outlines it so beautifully to Roland Hazard. He says, here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have what are called vital spiritual experiences. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes. Let's take a look about that. Ideas, how I think. Emotions, how I feel. And attitudes, what I believe, right? Those three things are going to need to be shaken from the very foundation. I'm going to need to have a revolutionary spiritual experience as a result of working the steps out of this book with someone else who's worked the steps out of this book. So one of the key things here is I wonder, luckily for me, I had the desperation of a drowning man. I was really able and desperate enough to try whatever it was that was offered to me. And so one of the things I like to ask people is, are you willing to take suggestion? Are you willing to sit down and follow some direction? Do you have the desperation of a drowning man? Because over on page 30, when we finally get to step 1, where it says we learned we had to concede to our innermost self we are alcoholic. Well, that concession, the word concede is surrender. That surrender is an internal surrender, right? I want to smash the delusion when I lay up my drinking experience against the drinking experience of those who came before me and the founders of this program. Smash the delusion that somehow, someday, I'm going to be able to control and enjoy my own drinking. So if I have any reservations, I need to get rid of them, right? I need to get rid of any reservations that I could somehow, someday control and enjoy my own drinking. If I experience the phenomenon of craving that happens when I pick up a drink, and I can't control how much I drink, and if when sober, I can't stop myself from picking up the next drink, I'm strangely insane when it comes to alcohol. So some things I like to ask these guys is, what are the most 10 insane things you've ever done in your life? And if you wrote a list of those things, which I did, the most insane thing I've ever done wasn't even on that list. My sponsor sat down and said, man, Stephen, the most insane thing you've ever done is pick up a drink stone cold sober and try and take another run at this thing. In the face of everything I knew, in the face of being humiliated and the suffering that all my drinking caused, that I was going to pick one drink up and take another shot at this. So, do I have the great obsession? Have I tried human power, right? Some of the things that we hear from people who don't have this reaction to alcohol, and it's even outlined in this book, is if you're an alcoholic, you would think you would stop drinking for your kids. You'd think you'd stop drinking for your relationship. You'd think you'd stop drinking to save your job. Well, those reactions, or those observations, refer to people whose reactions are different than mine, right? If I'm a moderate drinker, I'm going to be able to stop drinking to save my job or my marriage or my kids. If I'm a heavy drinker, the book lines it out pretty beautifully. I'm going to be able to stop or moderate, But if I'm a real alcoholic and I've got that hook, that allergy plus the obsession, I'm not going to be able to use human power to stop drinking. I'm not going to be able to attend enough meetings. I'm not going to be able to sponsor myself. One of the things I like to talk about too in the progression of alcoholism is that story of the jaywalker, right? I'm going to substitute my name for the story of the jaywalker. And it's as I start substituting how insane the progression of the illness is and all the different ways in which I try to stop and get this insane idea out of my head, it's really going to point to the fact that self-knowledge and lack of power is really my problem, right? I'm not going to be able to quit drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. I've got some insanity. It's a peculiar mental twist. I've got a strange mental blank spot that I need to worry about, right? So time and place is going to come. This is what Fred learns. Time and place is going to come. Well, how am I going to prepare for the time and place? How am I going to prepare for suddenly, right? I've got to be able to blind my experience up with no human power can relieve my alcoholism. So I got to get this idea out of my head that I'm going to be able to quit drinking on my own power. So what the book is really trying to do eventually is try to eliminate everything but the spiritual experience. No human power can relieve my alcoholism. I'm beyond human aid, right? I'm not going to be able to figure out how to quit drinking because I figure out a code or a philosophy of life. So by the time I get to Alcoholics Anonymous, the question becomes, am I out of options? Am I truly desperate enough to try to accept what it is that the people in this room have to offer me? Have I been badly mangled? Am I hopelessly defeated? Some of these are questions. Am I doomed to an alcoholic death? I love what the book says over here in More About Alcoholism when it says, almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consummation. So almost none of us walked into an AA meeting, took a look at the 12 steps on the wall, looked at him and said, yep, I think that's going to do it. I think that process is going to solve my alcoholism, right? So, but we saw that it really worked in others. So as part of my attendance at meetings, what I'm hoping to do is start to look around and see, hey, these people said they drank like I did. These people said they had the same problems, but yet they've recovered. They're talking about living these amazing lives. They're talking about getting their kids back and getting their jobs back and going out and living their dreams and going out and getting into some really cool vocations. That to me is the beginning of this sentence here. We saw that it really worked in others, right? So one of the things I like to try and remember is that I'm supposed to pull the newcomer in with the vision of what it looks like to be recovered, right? I'm supposed to be talking about the power of God in the 12 steps and how they're working in my life. Pull these newcomers in with a vision. And one of the things that happened for me, and I hope that's happening for these newcomers, is that they've come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as they've been living it. So when therefore we're approached by those in whom the problem has been solved, if there's nothing left for us to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet, then what we're trying to do is really, that's the only option left on the table, right? AA truly for me was the last house on the block. By the time I got to AA, I was out of options. I didn't have another idea. I didn't have another scam, right? I didn't have another plan. I was completely ready to accept the spiritual remedy. So have I been hopelessly defeated and badly mangled? So two choices. One, I can go on to the bitter end, blotting out the intolerable consciousness of my reality as best I could. And the other is to accept spiritual help. Another point in the book, we're going to get two more choices, right? Do I want to live on a spiritual basis, or do I want to die an alcoholic death? So brotherly and harmonious action. One of the things AA does and does really well is we're not just held together by the common problem, right? We're not just supposed to be sitting around in meetings talking about all the horrors that happen to us as a result of our drinking. Now in a 12-step call or at a treatment center, I'm going to be using a little bit of the war stories to identify. But what we're really held together, what we're really joined together by is the common solution, the way out on which we can absolutely agree. And the way out on which we can absolutely agree is the clear-cut, precise directions outlined for us in the big book. And you're going to need a sponsor in order to understand this program. Charlie used to tell this story. I think he got it from Mark. He would talk about, kind of handing a newcomer a copy of the big book would be like handing them a flight manual to an F-17 jet and telling them, all right, buddy, listen, when you're done reading this thing, there's one out in the parking lot. Go take this thing out for a spin and try not to hurt anybody, right? So we're going to need some help. We're going to need someone who's had this experience. So we beg of you, you hear on page 58, which is what it's kind of like we've heard this thing a million times in meetings, but when a newcomer's listening to this thing, it's going to have some pretty cool things for this person to consider. We're begging them to be fearless and thorough from the very start. We're literally begging these people to be fearless and thorough from the very start. We're going to ask them, if they want what we have, are they willing to go to any lengths to get it? That's kind of what we're looking for, the desperation of a drowning man. And so one of the things that I thought we'd talk about today, as opposed to just qualifying a new guy with step one, is anonymity. This idea that one of the things we're trying to do is really keep our personality in check. Let's see, are we over on time? How are we doing on time, guys? Kind of lost track. So one of the differences we talk about, sometimes we want to get clear on, is what does it mean to be in a closed meeting or an open meeting? I think we talked a little bit about that. We talked a little bit about the importance of having a home group. So what is the importance of a home group? Well, one of the important things about a home group is you come to a place over and over again where people get to know you, right? They have the ability to figure out who you are, and you've gotten a sponsor and you want to go to a place where people get to know you. One of the cool things about being a part of a home group is that you eventually can vote in a group conscience. You can have an opinion on some of the issues that are going on in this home group. And one of the things we recommend is that when you start going to a home group, you get a commitment, right? As you start to work through the steps, as you start to awaken spiritually, some of the things you can do early on in this journey is you can become a greeter. You can be part of setting up the meeting. You can be part of getting the coffee or cleaning up afterwards, right? Get a commitment at a home group. At Primary Purpose, we do a really good job of getting the newcomer introduced to everyone. You know, one of the hands of AA that was really important for me was to have someone just shake my hand and say, hey man, we're glad you're here. Welcome. You know, it made me feel welcome, made me feel a part of, you know, because I hadn't been welcomed or felt a part of in a really long time. So that's another thing we talk about at the foundation meeting, you know, and so I'm not sure exactly how we're doing on time. I forgot to send a timer, but I feel like I've been a little all over the place. I hope that I've done a fairly decent job this morning of trying to lay out the foundation, the identification that's critical, trying to qualify the new man, tell him what alcoholism is, what it isn't, tell him about the difference between open meetings and closed meetings, and really trying to make sure that they understand that we're in there when they're in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the things we like to talk about is what do you talk about in a meeting? Is it okay to come to a meeting and just dump all of your problems onto an entire meeting of people? One of the things I like to talk to the guys I sponsor with is that that's what the sponsorship is for, right? Come to me with the issues. Come to me with the problems. Let's take those through the inventory. Let's sit down and run those things and get true on what it is that you're suffering from. Not coming to a meeting and dumping your problems, right? We're not sitting in meetings talking about the problems. Let's make the meetings a cheerleading session on the power of God in the 12 steps. Let's just talk about what it is like to recover. Pull these new people in with a vision of what can happen is when AA starts to be the center point in your life as the gifts of sobriety start to come. Let's talk about the different types of meetings. So there's open discussion meetings, and I don't want to get on too big of a soapbox there. I don't want to get on a big soapbox about open discussion meetings, but most open discussion meetings, people can openly discuss whatever they'd like to. It's really the chairperson's job to get that meeting back on track and to bring a strong topic to those meetings. Speaker meetings are another type of meeting to go to. Step meetings are highly recommended. Big book meetings, of course, primary purposes. Really, that meeting saved my life. Meetings on traditions, one of the talks that I really have gotten a lot out of is when I found that what I really like to sit down to and talk about in the foundation meeting is the circle and triangle. Talk a little bit about the threefold illness. The circle and triangle is a symbol we used to see in the beginning of the book. It was taken out in the mid-90s over some copyright issues. But I think it's really cool to talk a little bit about the circle and triangle. So we have a threefold illness of mind, body, and spirit. And the circle and triangle, the circle represents the wholeness of the AA community. And the triangle represents recovery, unity, and service. So the threefold illness is treated with the threefold solution of mind, body, and spirit. At the base of that triangle is recovery. And recovery are the 12 steps. That's what I do to recover from the hopeless condition and body, get connected to God. And once I get into those, I start learning about the 12 traditions. That's what keeps AA held together as it's currently now joined. And that's the unity part of this thing. And then once I get over here onto the service part of the triangle, it's about the 12 concepts of world service. So mind, body, and spirit. I'm going to combat the threefold illness with the threefold solution. One of the things I also like to talk about is a little bit, it's like, I love what Bill said in the 50s. He talked about our chief responsibility as recovered members of AA is to give newcomers an adequate presentation of the program. So some of the questions I like to ask myself is our group giving newcomers an adequate presentation of the program? Am I, as a recovered member, giving a newcomer an adequate presentation of the program? I think that we do a pretty good job at Primary Purpose Group. I've come from a long line of big book sponsorship, so I like to think I do a pretty good job. But another cool thing Bill wrote later on is this responsibility statement. We don't hear it a lot in meetings. It used to be big when I got here in the 90s. It's this statement that he wrote. It's just so simple. He says, I am responsible. When anyone anywhere reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA to be there. And for that, I am responsible. So I'm always wondering whether or not I'm going to be part of that responsibility statement. And am I going to be the hand of AA? I want to stand in the gap between hope and hopelessness. When a new guy comes sinking into the mire that is alcoholism, I want to be there to offer him a real solution to a deadly problem, right? We have a lifelong chronic condition that we don't have to suffer from sober. See, our way of living has its advantages for all. You know, when I'm sober, connected to God, and in service, this way of living, this program of Alcoholics Anonymous has its advantages to my children, to my employers, to people in the community. You know, so that's what I really want to try and be about. But well, guys, I think I'm going to wrap that up. All in all, by saying that, you know, my life in my hands has not been a tremendous success. It's actually been a chronicle of colossal human failure turned to usefulness by the divine alchemy of a loving creator. You know, so I'm trying to help every newcomer that walks into that door get clear on what it means to be alcoholic, what it means to find the solution, and what it means to work the program of action. And for that, I am responsible. So thanks, y'all, for letting me be here this morning, and I appreciate your time. You guys have a great day.